Hello guys and welcome to a new video. So today we're gonna look into a couple different things. First, we're gonna look into for and while loops in PHP, and second, we will look into arrays in PHP as well. So what we're gonna do now is start looking into a for loop, which by the way doesn't look very different from for loops in Java. So I just created a file, so I'm just going to copy the content and then I'm just going to create a new file for uh, arrays.php, paste the content in here. And for the title, it's just going to be arrays in PHP. So arrays and for loops, they are normally used together because you're going to have an array, you're going to loop through the array and do whatever you want with the elements. So first of all, let's just look into a for loop, just making sure everybody's comfortable with that. So for that, essentially, again, it looks like very similar to a for loop in Java. So you would have a for loop, and then you would have like initialization, semicolon, condition, semicolon, counter, and then this is the body of the for loop. It's going to be here. So for that, let's actually have a PHP delimiters in here. So let's say we have a for loop. Initialization is just going to be a variable you would initialize. So for instance, I is equal to 0. And then a condition, let's say I is less than to 10. Counter, so for instance, we're going to do this, let's say 10 times. So, it's just going to be I plus plus. And then I can do, for instance, echo p, the variable I, close the p, semicolon. And, let me just delete those. And then to run this, it's going to be arrays.php. We can see here is actually the I is printed every single iteration. Now the other thing is while loop, which again, typically anything in a for loop you can execute using a while loop. So let's say I have a counter is equal to 1, and then the while loop, again, really identical to Java. So while counter is less than 10, let's say I will echo the counter, and then I will increment the counter just to make sure I'm not gonna run into an infinite loop. So you can see here is actually the counter is printed. Now, why do we use for loop, while loop? Is again because like when we work with arrays, essentially, like elements, they have their own index, and then basically, given that you know the index value for the array, you can print, the value that exists under that index. Okay, so with that, I'm just gonna actually delete these. And for array now in PHP, again, like my philosophy in programming is if you know the concept, picking up the syntax in different programming languages should not be a problem. So let's create an array. Again, array is just a variable, so it has to be preceded with a $sign. So let's say I have an array called nums, 4 numbers. Now arrays in PHP, they start with the keyword array. And essentially an array is just like a function. This array is a function, and then it takes as arguments the values that you want to store. So let's say we're trying to store 10, 20, and 30. So we know from Java, basically this is an ordered array. So it means that the order in which those elements appear really matter. So if I want to print this 10, essentially we know that these elements are stored with index, which is like hidden. You can't really see it, but we know how it works. So this 10 is stored under index 0, this 20 is stored under index 1, this 30 is stored under index 2. So if I want to print 10, for instance, I'm just going to actually echo nums and then square bracket the index at which you want to access. In this case, it's 0. So if I just refresh, I got 10. Index 1 is obviously 20. Index 2 is 30. What if I try to access an index that does not really exist? So let's say index 4. I get an error. It says undefined offset 4 because it does, there again, there's no element that exists for this particular array. Now, if I want to actually add elements to my array, the way you would do this is just actually by using the array name, and then you just need to pass empty square brackets. You don't have to specify the index you want to store. PHP will know exactly the end of your array, and then it will know exactly where it's going to actually put the elements. So let's say it's 40, and then 0, 1, 2, 3. So obviously in this case, it's not going to be any changes. Let's actually add one more to this, and then put like 50 in this, and then you can see 50 is just imprinted. So as your array actually gets bigger and bigger, sometimes it's just hard to count how many elements are there. And PHP has a built-in function to actually retrieve the count of your array, meaning how many elements are stored. So return how many elements are stored in the array. There is a function called count that essentially, if you look into documentation, it returns all the elements of an array. So actually it nums, and then let's say I'm just echo. So my array has counts elements. Let me just so my array has 5 elements. So if you count them, 3 from here, 2 more, and then that's essentially 5 different elements. So now with this array, and kind of like relating this back to for loop, if I want to print the elements just one by one, I'm not going to go nums of 0, nums of 1, 2, etc. I can obviously use a for loop, especially knowing that the index is kind of going sequential, starting from 0 all the way up. So I can do for I is 0, I is less than 5, or we're just going to do it in another way now, and then I plus plus, and then I'm just going to echo nums of index I. So this is going to print them right next to each other. So I'm actually going to do a paragraph tag, and then I'm going to end with a paragraph tag, so every element is printed on its own line. And you can see now this element is just these elements are printed on the page like that. Now the 5 in this case, so let's say I have my array like this, and then at some point I say, well, nums, I'm gonna add 60. Now over here there's no change because the size of my array is very dynamic, and again, you will never know how many elements are there, and even if there is X number of elements in your array, at some point they will never stay the same number all the time. So you would have to actually be more dynamic when you write your own programs. So rather than providing 5, you just let PHP worry about how many elements in the array. So you pretty much need to do count nums. And then now when I refresh, notice it actually retrieves 60. And even if you add one more to this, it's going to be no problem. It's just going to know that for you and do the heavy lifting for you. So essentially, this is a kind of using a for loop. Now, PHP also has different types of arrays. So this is actually the one-dimensional or the indexed arrays. However, there are other types of arrays in PHP called associative arrays, and that's going to be our focus. So this is really very simple. We have learned it in Java. Not saying that the associative arrays are complicated, but I don't think many of you have seen associative arrays before if you only learned Java, because that's kind of like a new concept. Okay, so we're just gonna actually now look into associative arrays, and essentially, again, if you understand this, associative arrays is not really very different. So I will actually create a new file, like it's called arrays A for associative, and then I'm just gonna take the template and paste it in this file. And that's gonna be associative arrays. So for associative arrays, let me just take this file. Yeah. So in the array that we just looked at, here is the idea. We know that the index for these elements essentially start from 0, go all the way up. So there is kind of like some hidden stuff out there, but we know how they would work. Now, essentially for associative arrays, it's kind of different, because let's say I want to store an array called grades, and this array actually, stores student names and their grade. So I really, if I do something like 90, 100, 50, etc., I'm not really storing the name. I'm just storing the grade. And in PHP with associative arrays, it's actually possible to keep a track of both of these values. So for instance, you're going to say some name, and then that name got this grade. And you will have also another name in here, and then this name will pretty much got this grade, and so on and so forth. So every student in this case would have an association to the grade they got. Okay, so in PHP, this is pretty much kind of like called key value. So the key is going to be the name, the value is whatever value they got. So it's going to be like integer or double value, so on and so forth. And that's kind of the premise of associative arrays. So associative arrays needs one pair of information: key, value. The key and the value, they are actually separated by equal greater than sign. Don't leave any space between the two. Make sure they are just right next to each other. So for grades now, let's actually implement this in this case. So let's say John got 90. Sarah got 100. Mike got 50. And essentially now, kind of like this is going to be also array, and I don't need these. And essentially, just like similar to indexed arrays, you start with array. Although actually, if you use square brackets, it works. Like starting, I think, from version 7 of PHP, they or 5.3, I believe. Now we are in version 7, but essentially it would work. But sometimes, like for people who have older versions of PHP, I would still do it, this way: array, and then we have the key. In this case, John, the value is 90. Key is Sarah, value is 100. Key is Mike, value is 50. Key value pairs are actually separated by the commas, and that's pretty much it. So that's how associative arrays actually work. So now, if I want to print the grade that John got, it's going to be exactly the same. Now, instead of index 0 in this case, you pretty much need to give the index, which is a string in this case. So John, let's just echo and see what we get. Oh, that's actually arrays, I think 90. So you can say John got 90, or like Sarah or whatever it is, and now you get 100. And similarly now, let's say you want to add a new grade for a new student. So let's say Sally. Single quotes would work, but since I started with double quotes, I like to continue in that notation. Let's say Sally got 95. And then to Sally, you will see 95. Now, one thing which also applies to indexed arrays that I didn't show you, there is a built-in function in PHP called printr. So printr will actually print the content of the array in a readable format, because that's what actually R stands for. So for instance, if I do just echo grades, notice it says array to string conversion. That's kind of like a warning, and then it just says array. But if I do print R grades, see what you get now. 95 is from here, so let me just comment this, and you can see it's array. Index is John, 90, index is Sarah, 100, Mike 50, Sally 95. And that's essentially what it works. And you can again do this for indexed arrays. It doesn't have to be associative arrays. It would work just fine. And kind of like it's good sometimes to take a look at this one, because it gives you the idea of your elements, especially for arrays that are relatively small. It gives you an idea of what you have, and sometimes like what kind of data you're working with. So it really works nicely. But again, I mean, this is mostly for like debugging, not something you want to really display for the users. So it doesn't really work, for kind of security reasons, to allow the people to see what kind of data you have and what values you're storing. So essentially now, if I want to, let's say, print this array, how would I be able to print this array? Now, to print this array, and that's something, again, those who only learn Java probably have not seen before, there is a new type of a for loop in PHP called for each. So for each, it's a great way to do looping, because as I just showed you in a for loop, you would have to know how many times you're going to loop through the array. So you would have to pretty much use like count, or give the length of your array so that you're going to print the element. For each, you don't have to know any of that. You don't have to worry about it even. So essentially the way it works is you have a for each, and then for each takes the name of the array. So in this case, it's just the grades, and then as, let's say, G. And let me show you just like echo G. So it's actually in this case it's going to be, because it's associative arrays, let's name them key value, and then echo key got a grade value, and let's just actually add a paragraph, so everyone is gonna be on its own line. So there you go, we have key value. These are the only variables, and essentially the rest is just appears as a string. So now for each works this way. It takes the name of the array, and in this case we're dealing with associative arrays. So with associative arrays, remember, there is the key and there is the value. So now every element is gonna be actually stored as this pair, key value. So we start with John 90. John is going to be the key, 9 is going to be the value. So we echo the key John, and then we echo the value 90. Now, again, the nice thing about this is you don't have to know the length of the array. It's just going to automatically work that internally and figure it out for you. So now we take the second element, it's going to be Sarah, and then it's just also going to be for Mike and 50 as well. And then finally for Sally, it's just going to be figured out. So see how it actually prints this without a problem. And we're going to be using for each actually later on as well, because this is essentially when we work with databases, like you have user's ID, email, phone number, etc. Essentially we'll have a key value. Every like attribute in the table is just going to be the key, and then the value is whatever is stored under that attribute, line by line. And that's how this actually relates to for each. Now, the for each also works with regular actually arrays. So again, let me just create like a simple array like nums is 10, 20, 30, 40. And remember, this is actually array. So now I'll do for each nums as n. Now remember over here, the indexes, you don't have to worry about the key value because, you know, essentially here you only have the value. So echo n, and let's actually again do a paragraph. And you will have 10, 20, 30, and 40. So this is really nice because you don't have to, again, worry about the size of the array, things like that. So I think that's pretty much it for today. I hope it was helpful. Let me know if you guys have any questions. Have a good day, and I'll see you later. Bye-bye.